Hello everybody, I hope you're enjoying yourselves in Colombia and the festival is wonderful. I'm sorry I couldn't make it. I'm supposed to talk about the upending of publishing and digital networks. Several years ago, we'd started a publishing house called Kwani. And at the time, a young group of writers had kind of agreed that we would try and not sell African rights to our work to Western publishers, so that we would say, oh, I want a deal. This had happened because Helon Habila at the time had his book published by Penguin, and that they kept the Commonwealth rights but were unable to distribute the book in Nigeria because they don't. So these were conversations that we were having all the time at conferences that we met and so on and so forth. So when I sold my book to Granta, I said I want to keep my African rights because we've got an independent publishing house here which can publish, distribute. We sell books up to 1,000 copies, print runs up to 1,000, even up to 3,000. There was Farafina in Nigeria, there was Chimurenga and other independent publishers in South Africa. We were in a season of independent publishing. Granta said no, there's no way. Let's just tell you something. There is no way that you will ever be allowed to disbundle what they call Commonwealth rights and say, I want to pick which part of the Commonwealth I want my rights in. If there's one colonial advantage British-based publishers have, it is that you can't do that. Or you're not allowed to do that, or they'll make it very expensive for you to do that. This means, very simply, for example, if an Indian bookstore, chain of bookstores, wants to import a version of an important book by an Indian, and so goes to South Africa, which is in the Commonwealth of English, to buy cheap copies, they'll be told, no, you have to order them from the UK. So the price of books in English, in India, English-speaking Africa, is insane. So you're paying for the print runs that were made in the United Kingdom, for United Kingdom audiences, and there are a billion Indians, there are close to 200 million Nigerians, 30 million Kenyans. There could be 200 million Africans who are educated and whose official language is English. So there we sit. Now, I was recently in a conversation. We are starting a publishing house, a digital publishing house. We want to produce mass-based books digitally, romance, sci-fi. So we have this team of people who are trying to create large numbers and diversity of books to distribute. And so I met this guy who had done this sorts of research on where digital education is going to go in the developing world and so on and so forth. And he said, there are 100,000 innovative ideas on how to transform education in the developing world. But our ideas that we thought about, our consultancy with all the money that we had, and it had a lot of money to do that research, not much could make a difference because the textbook publishers live in another era, which is to say they will not cede ground in any form, and they are in command of what our kids learn in school. Their rights systems and the way those rights systems have evolved from the colonial times are, to put it mildly, hectic, crazy, colonial, controlling, and so on and so forth. Now, for me, the question is, the beginning to bypass starts to happen that it's where mass-based, fresh, original, relevant, interesting content, and in my world, fiction, popular fiction, romance, sci-fi, futurism, erotica, fun children's books that are relevant to really probably the largest and most complex society in the world that is fortunate in some form, had never fallen yet into a certain way the mafias of both publishing, production of knowledge had. It's not by will, it's by chance. Africa was maybe not a good investment destination, and so these networks did not establish themselves firmly. So what we have right now is 130 million people, I'm told, by McKinsey, who consume between $4 and $20 a day. That number will double in 8 years to close to 300 million people. And those 300 million people have money to consume, have smartphones, and don't need to buy books. And so to buy a book, really, if you put it very simply, is to buy into an ownership system of which the $14 you African will pay for that book, right? There's $9 going to some other publisher. There's $1.50 going to some writer, Chimamanda Adichie, Binyavanga Wainaina, who, at least me, have not built a house of the money I have earned of writing. And then other middle networks, because all these publishing companies own each other, and the other one owns the other one, and the other one owns the other one. This shit has been dating back to I don't know when. But those things are frozen. They're frozen. Of course, we're in the season of the great opening. They're frozen, but they have not penetrated. Which is to say, to buy a new Penguin book in Africa, you would have to go on a hunt so complex, so diabolical, so expensive, so impossible to find a relevant book for you. You won't find one. You'll find 3. And maybe one every 3 years turns up. And it's half your salary to buy it. It's not a sustainable model. So, of course, we could say we're going to have a revolution and bear arms and destroy the whole thing, or hire hackers anonymous to just kill all their archives, but that kind of would be a waste of time. Because quite simply, if you produce mass books now, if you simply get money, investment money, put your own money down, and produce 40, 50, 60, 100, 200 books a year, right now, you have platforms that are so thirsty for content, and there is no content being made. Because no one's been stupid enough to say, I'll put my money down and make this content, and this content is essential. Not essential necessarily for social good, though it is essential for social good, but essential because people like to imagine. Essential because, let me start here. So now you have, let's look at this thing called Nigeria. 200 million people. It's the largest black African country. They say its population will exceed India's in 2050. Place of enormous talents, enormous diversities, many old kingdoms. Some have populations that have a population now, like the Yoruba have over 20 million people. There are 20 million Hausas. There are 20 million Igbos. Lagos is population 19 million, depending on who's doing the talking. So this bunch of people, right? The people who distribute goods in that place are nobody's bookshop or nobody's film service supply enterprise to give you Hollywood films. No, it's Igbo market traders, or let's call them market traders in Lagos, Onitsha. These cities, they're cities that are markets. Onitsha, Aba. And what people have been doing in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, there was a thing called Onitsha market literature. It's popular literature written, produced, and distributed by market traders in Nigeria. We're in that season again. So then comes Nollywood. What is Nollywood? Not even 10 years have passed before this thing properly explodes into the world, right? People with cheap cameras, not even digital yet, making movies in a week. Hundreds and hundreds of movies. And throwing them down this pipeline of rivers, roads, trains, ideas, bicycles, all over Nigeria. Yes? Primarily in Pidgin English or in English. In Yoruba. Now there's Yoruba one. Yeah. And from the day it started, people bought. They bought and bought. Then they bought again and bought and bought. The thing has multiplied so many times no one even knows. They say it's the second largest film industry in the world. No one knows because there's just more keeps coming. Now, Nollywood films right now are on digital networks, which is to say on the service middle class pay TV channels, they're dedicated channels to just Yoruba films. They're dedicated channels to just Ravas films in less than 10 years. You have an industry paying, not owned by anybody, not Apple, no big corporate. No one can buy in because they can't even get in the tangle of networks, relationships, whatever. Like, as a decolonizing act, you can't get better than Nollywood. Like, you can put your copyright law and do whatever you want to do, but copyright to protect what? Someone is making relevant content. Relevant just for the cheap thrills that it produces. Relevant for the idea that it just was Africans kissing Africans, talking to Africans, marrying Africans, diabolically manipulating other Africans in diabolically melodramatic thrillers. I got hooked. me with all my highfalutin, read Proust and whatever, when I keep watching them. This woman who converts people into a cell phone. How better can you get than that? So my contention really is first that the writers of my generation and the writers in English, certainly out of Africa, generally are products of a publishing industry, right? There may be people who loved to read. There may be people who were the only person among, or one of 100 people in their primary school, and their primary school was an elite primary school of, bright young Anglo-educated or Anglo-facing Africans who learned to know what a penguin book looks like and what good prose looks like in English and so on and so forth, and with constantly the eye out there and at some idea that you can contend, and I believe I can, with those cool writers in New York and those cool writers in London for the same edge of a marketplace, which is like you're edgy or different or cool or socially concerned or more socially concerned or even more socially concerned than anything else. But really, the majority of your cash money comes because of the people in the Midwest. That's who it is. It's George and Dave Matilda in the Midwest who are the buyers. That's the primary place that all English-speaking publishing faces ultimately, and when it's doing so in fiction. Right? That's why people get book deals, they get contracts and everything else. That even those novels may end up being on a reading list in an education system in Africa is only a byproduct of the fact of it had been bought for the Midwest. Now, so my question really is, who is avant-garde? And by avant-garde, who is the person who is creating the revolution? And the revolution really is the necessity for books. The necessity for books at this point just means something pounded, and cheaply available to a mass audience. And because we are not binding anymore, because you don't have to bind, you don't have to build bookstores, you don't have to transport books up and down the middle of nowhere, it's going to be a digital revolution. It's going to be a digital revolution simply because it can be. Simply because the platforms are there to buy, sell, distribute, download in minutes, this thing. In my country, we have digital money, and so I pay my bills with my phone. No cash transaction. You can buy my book for about $2 on the phone and download it. Now, my book, which I love producing it, is never going to be a mass book. For reasons we can talk about for hours and hours and hours, but there'll be a waste of time now. What my book can do is not save African literature. It has its own esoteric audience, and it'll continue to. It won't pay my rent. It'll pay nobody's rent. It'll build new industries. None of these books are going to build industries. Chimamanda's books are not going to build industries. So to build industries is having thousands and thousands of romance books, of kids' fantasy books, of transporting our children away, getting them hooked on these things through this just sheer transportation. At this point, the medium of transportation is not that important, which is to say, is it a spaceship? Is it using African technology? Do I care? Is it Africans? Yes. Is it Africans speaking an African language? Is it Africans who look like the kids you have in school? Those are the now primal questions that we have. Like Nollywood, you want that initial spurt, which really needs money, really investment money to not just pay writers decently, to pay writers something, and to be able to purchase the time to get talent, to produce large amounts of work and sell them. That's what I've been involved with. That's why I came back from America, because I found America boring. It's not a wonderful place. It's diverse. I lived just outside New York City. I was there a long time. It was wonderful. But I was too old to enter that little thing called the melting pot and melt. I was unmelted and it's not yet meltable. I think you have to do that when you're like 16 to be meltable. I'm not meltable. Further to that, people say New York City is diverse, which is something I understand and don't understand. So it's like a menu, So like today I can have Haitian sex, with vegan, Swedish burgers, and so on and so forth. And you have all these diverse communities. But, what is a common platform? I mean, people are existing in a common platform. It's a common schooling system. So it's just many bright colors. And a few publishing houses, and so on and so forth. But those bright colors talk about diversity. But here, what we're talking about is that the platforms within which people live, what people call community, can be 20 million people, can be 200 people. Their manner of engagement, their manner of politics and everything else, all these are things still in formation. There is no agreed platform yet. And because there's no agreed platform yet, there's not only what to do, there are adventures to be had in terms of creating. And so the making of the platforms now is interesting because it's now not making of a digital platform. The digital platforms are there in their hundreds. Easy ones to make, easy ones to monetize, and so on and so forth. Is that to throw the diversity of stories into these platforms and sell them. It's not in our question of thinking too much. And because we've seen, not only the Nollywood industry, we've seen the Nollywood industry grow, explode. Kenya has now Riverwood making films. Ghana has a film industry. Exploded, right? Cheap cameras. We've seen now the Nigerian pop music industry explode. And it came in much later than the film industry and is diverse, complicated. But what's interesting is it's taken the same types of people. There's people from the same networks that produce the writers, which is to say the middle classes with their overt Christianity quite often, with their addiction to Western books and so on and so forth. And they've learned themselves how to find ways to be more diverse Nigerians. So you've got middle class kids learning pidgin so they can sing songs that hundreds of millions of people can consume. You have rappers who are all of 21 years old. You're rapping in Yoruba, and because there are 20 million Yoruba people, they're a marketplace. And now where are they? That person can get the limelight on the digital pay TV networks 10 times more than any Chimamanda or any other person, simply because they can, simply because they have that mass audience, simply because they produced for it. It's not even asking what does the audience want, right? At some point it was just really, why doesn't anybody sing songs in Yoruba that are relevant to my life? And so just the fact of somebody singing it becomes a revolutionary act. The fact of somebody ennobling pidgin becomes a revolutionary act because you transact in pidgin. You live in pidgin. Millions and tens of millions of you. And nobody, really, hardly anybody, even me, genuinely, lives in the language of the prose within which I produce. So my proposition basically is that in terms of saving, these platforms that maybe can carry some literature, maybe will send 10,000 copies. I think there are novelists, literary novelists in Nigeria who will send 30,000 copies in 10 years and something like this. That's true. But that's not the creation of a marketplace. I'm very, very interested, personally, in being that generation of people who own the wealth of our content. Really genuinely own it. And genuinely speak to those Africans and other people around the world with real money and say, this giant hole has to be plugged. At this point, those platforms have been made. They can digest enormous amounts of content. My phone can digest as many novels as I want. And that we are in this kind of ridiculous complaining position of saying that there are no novels. Like, how come that gap is not being made where the $3 or $4 million that's just needed to start to kickstart an industry that produces hundreds and hundreds of novels, just so I have enough for my phone. My phone! So I'm not part of this sentimental, nostalgic, where did literature go, book loving, the smell of books, Proust nonsense. I want to be part of the new world. As an African, we are the new world.